Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our next chapter of Bible, Bishop and Betty. But we've got an interesting situation, and that is, maybe this is difficult to imagine, but I'm not with Betty right now. You can see that because I have an iPhone up here. But that's because Betty is in Texas, and I'm in Minnesota. And the reason I'm in Minnesota is because I'm doing a wedding in just a few minutes. Yep, in just a few minutes, I'm going to be doing a wedding here in Minnesota, where it is beautiful and lovely and exciting for me to be able to do. But it can't be exciting unless I have Betty involved. And Betty, I guess that means you get to go to this wedding if I keep the cell phone on. But what we're going to do, Betty, you have had a busy week, I think, and you're getting ready to go out to camp pretty soon.
Well,
Vacation Bible School,
yeah.
and then camp, right?
It's not like I'm spending the night. It's just like the day.
Yeah, Vacation Bible School, you don't stay overnight there. Or else if you did, you'd have to sleep in the pews or you'd have to sleep on the stage. Not a good idea. All right, well, we're ready to roll. And today we're going to talk about Ezra again. And Ezra finally gets some answers from the second book of Esdras. You may remember the last chapter that Ezra had lots of questions about whether or not he'd be alive to see all the things that the archangels were talking about. But as we have said, it is a good idea to listen when an archangel speaks to you. What about you, Betty? If an archangel showed up in your house, do you think you'd want to listen?
I don't know.
What do you think you'd do if an archangel showed up and said, "Hello, Betty, I am the archangel Uriel"?
I would be like, and what are you supposed to do? Help me?
And as you know, angels and archangels are messengers. So, after all, an archangel came with a message, and the archangel Gabriel had a message once upon a time, do you remember? Well, today, as the archangel Uriel went on to give some hints of answers to Ezra, the angel finally said to him, "The day is coming when everyone on earth is going to be very scared." They're going to be very scared, but at the same time, the people will not have much faith. In fact, it will be worse than you've ever seen and can even imagine. Well, if you had heard this, Betty, would you really want to live to see all of this scary stuff? Well, maybe Ezra won't like what he's hearing. And so at this point, the archangel Uriel gave Ezra a beautiful little poem about what would lie ahead. So I'm going to read this poem from the Apocrypha for you. "The sun shall suddenly begin to shine at night, and the moon during the day. Blood shall drip from the wood, and the stone shall utter its voice. The people shall be troubled, and the stars shall fall." Well, Ezra didn't understand any of this, but just between you and me, Betty, centuries later on, when people would read this on Good Friday and Easter, the people might figure out what was going on here. Because the archangel goes on to say that there would be someone who would be coming, who would reign, that'd be the king, and the disobedient people would not recognize him. And everything would be made very, very different. And the people would not understand what was happening. Well, the archangel went on to say that this was all that he was allowed to tell Ezra at the time. But if Ezra would keep on praying and keep crying and not eat anything for 7 days, he would hear even more from the archangel. So that's what Ezra did. But it was really like a dream. Now, do you ever have dreams, Betty? And do you ever wake up remembering the dream and wonder if it really happened or not?
Well, I knew it was a good thing. I know it didn't happen in real life.
I know it. And that's the thing about dreams. You know, you just wonder, and then you say, am I awake or am I not awake? And then later on you say, do I remember or not remember? Well, Ezra came out of this meditation and he fainted. And the angel was there again and he picked him up. But then one of the officers came to him and said, so where have you been and why do I look so sad, like you've been a ghost or seen a ghost or something? Come on, eat something, because your job is to keep us together like a shepherd does his sheep. But Ezra told him to go away and come back in 7 days. Well, Ezra needed time to figure out everything that he had seen and heard. So it was a good thing that he was by himself for a while, so that no one would interrupt his thoughts. So during these 7 days, some of what he had seen and heard started to make much more sense. Ezra needed to talk to God. So he was very polite, and he told God many beautiful things that Ezra had seen God do. But what Ezra wanted to know was, if the people were so disobedient and nasty and they didn't listen to God, why didn't God just punish them? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever seen that in school, Betty, where you can see that some of your students, your friends, are upsetting the teacher? Have you ever seen one of your teachers get upset?
I don't think so.
Well, you're in a good school. And of course, your mom's a teacher and she never gets upset, right? Okay, I get the answer there. Well, remember what the archangel said. So as soon as Ezra had asked God questions, whoosh, there was the archangel again. Well, this time, the archangel was very, very direct and said, hey, Ezra, you better listen to me and pay attention to what I have to say. I'm going to tell you more. Well, Ezra told him to please speak and that he would listen. And the archangel said, you know what I think is your problem? I think you love Israel more than you love the God of Israel. And that's a big problem. Well, Ezra then asked the archangel a good question. And it was this. So if I'm not supposed to love Israel so much, then why was I born? I mean, it's a good question. Of course, by now you've figured out that the archangels sometimes say things that are impossible for us to do, just to prove that we're not in charge, but God's in charge. In other words, God can do what is impossible for us to do, but sometimes we think that we can do impossible things on our own. Well, the archangel told Ezra to count all of the people who had not yet been born, to gather up all of the scattered raindrops, and to look at all the flowers that had just died and make them bloom again. One of the funny things he said to do was to take a picture of a voice. Now, can you imagine taking a picture of a voice? But here's the problem. The archangel told Ezra that if he would do these impossible things, that he would answer Ezra's questions. Ezra didn't know what to say. I think he figured out pretty quickly that all of these things were impossible for human beings to do. But the archangel's point was, as he said, just like you can't do those things, so you can't discover why God does what he does and what his plans are for Israel. Well, one of God's messages is a good one for us to remember. The word from the Lord was, the creation cannot move faster than the Creator. You know what that means, Betty? It means sometimes we want God to do things faster than he's ready to do, but we think he ought to listen to us. And you know what? He's in charge, we're not. So, Ezra was very puzzled because he didn't understand that. And the word from the Lord was, Ezra, can a mom have 10 children all at the same time? Or does she have one at a time 10 times? Well, except for twins and triplets, this made sense to Ezra, because it meant that every child in every generation keeps moving closer to what lies ahead. So if there are 10 children, sometimes the youngest doesn't get to see things that the oldest child has seen. So that's why your big sister sometimes knows about things that you don't know about because you weren't born when it happened. But having 10 children at the same time, I don't think that's really a good deal, is it?
Like at the same exact time, that would be impossible.
And that's what the archangel is saying to Ezra. Don't you think that's impossible? Now, do you remember a popular song called The Circle of Life? Yeah. What is that from a popular Disney movie?
Yeah.
Yep. That's right. Well, many, many years before, in this Apocryphal book, before anybody decided to write that song, God was explaining to Ezra that life is like a circle. So God gave the message to Ezra through the archangel that Ezra needed a refresher course on creation. That means that Ezra needed to remember who had created everything, and that since God had created everything, he could do anything he wanted, even if people didn't understand it or like it. Well, it seems like every time God made his point, Ezra wanted to know more. So God told him, stand up and listen, Ezra. Now, the next message seems to be unbelievable, because up until now, all of God's creation, and especially Israel, had to listen to angels and archangels and prophets, all of whom had brought messages from God. Well, here's what God then said to Ezra. Sometime in the future, I myself am going to come into the world, and that's when people will see really unbelievable things start to happen. Ooh, think about that, Betty. God is saying he's going to come into the world someday. But here's a really important lesson for you and me to remember. The word to Ezra was, because Adam brought sin into the world, even good people now have to suffer. But for them, there are good things lying ahead. But the really bad people who are suffering now in this world, well, they're going to have more problems lying ahead of them. So you see, Betty, just because we are good or not so good doesn't mean we always have a better life in this world. But what it means is one day when Jesus calls us home, we will have the perfect life being with him. Now, Ezra continued to look a little confused. But like some people say, here is the punchline, Betty. Do you know what a punchline is?
No.
Well, that means here is the word for the moment. And here it comes. God said, for my son, the Messiah, shall be recognized by those who follow him. But my son will die, as will the world, but will be brought back to life. And I, the Most High, will judge the human beings, and there are two places that they can go. I think you know what's happening next here. They can either go to the happy place or to the sad and unhappy place. And I think you know what they call the sad and unhappy place that people can go to, right? Yeah, it's the H word, right?
Yes,
that's right. It's a 4-letter word, begins with H.
It's supposed to be a bad word.
It is, so we're not going to say the H word. But the other H word we're going to say, right? And that's the good place. And what's the H word for the good place?
I already said it, but I'll say it again.
Heaven. But remember, you see, it goes on to be able to say that human beings get to see these places. But they need to know that they need to lead a good life. And so I will show the human beings these places as I judge them with compassion. But some of them have not ever followed my commandments. And some of them even say, I don't exist. Can you believe people thinking God doesn't exist? And he says, but remember, I love the people I created, God said. So God went on to tell Ezra, by the way, no one else yet has ever heard this except you so far. Well, of course, Ezra was really blown away by that, to think that God would say that to him. And all he could say was, oh, dear Lord, blessed are those who are still alive and follow your commandments. But Ezra was still a little bit nervous about hearing God speak to him, and he saw that there were lots of people in the world doing bad things who were not listening to God. So he told God about how nervous he was, and God said, "Listen up again, Ezra. I will tell you once again, and I want you to listen more carefully. One of the things that God told him is that you make a cheap pot out of mud, and you wouldn't put real diamonds on it for decoration. So why would God give more to those people who are disobedient?" God went on to tell Ezra that it was really sad when people know the truth, but then they disobey him. God told Ezra that the people who know what is good should act good. Don't you think people ought to act nice, Betty? The world would be a lot better place. In fact, God went on to tell Ezra even some more inside information so that Ezra would understand that God loved him and trusted him. You know, it's like that, Betty. Sometimes God will give us information and speak to us because he trusts us and he knows that we love him. Well, God pointed out that people make choices and that God doesn't make people do things. Ezra was blown away by these conversations, and he decided that this was a good time to pray. It's a beautiful prayer, by the way, in the second book of Ezra, in the Apocrypha, and it has the whole prayer written down. But Ezra loved the people God had asked him to lead, so Ezra asked God to have mercy. Well, do you remember how in church we say, "Lord, have mercy upon us"? You know how we do that at Mass? Well, Ezra said that quite a few times for himself. He said, "Lord, have mercy upon us, Lord, have mercy upon us, Lord, have mercy upon us," and for all of God's people, so that God would have mercy on them. But you know that Ezra kept waiting for God's final answers of when all the things that God had talked about would take place. Well, people are like that sometimes. When they have something on their minds, that's all they can talk about or think about. Have you ever been like that, where you have something on your mind and you can't get it out of your mind? You go, get out of my mind. But it keeps sticking around. Well, Ezra had a one-track mind, and that was he wanted all of the answers. So instead of becoming frustrated with Ezra, God told Ezra some more stories or parables so that Ezra could figure it out. Well, God was super kind about Ezra's many, many questions. So he told Ezra to take 7 more days to pray, but that this time he would be allowed to eat something, which was good news for Ezra. But he wanted him to eat, you ready for this, Betty? You're not going to believe this. He told him, "Go out to that field over there. Do you see it?" Ezra says, "Yeah, that's a pretty nice field." Well, God says, "Good. The only thing you can eat are those flowers." Yeah, I know. I mean, I guess he was the first flower child. But anyway, he went out there and he was allowed to eat the flowers for the next 7 days. That's what Ezra did. And in the next chapter, we're going to find out what happens when you only eat flowers for 7 days.
I would rather eat the stem than the flower because we eat like stuff that grows.
Huh? I think you're... Well, what I want to ask Ezra is whether he put salt and pepper on his flowers or whether he liked honey on them. So maybe we'll try and figure that out. What do you think? Well, I don't know. But you know what? I promise you next week I'm going to answer the question about that. And Betty, thanks for coming to this. And here I am in Minnesota, and there you are in Texas. And I love you so very much. Say goodbye to everybody, honey. Bye, everyone. We love you. Thanks for checking in with us. And don't forget to read the Apocrypha. Good reading.